When I was 7 years old, I was a hopeless romantic with dreams about falling in love. I should also mention that at age 7, I was also a huge skeptic of Disney's princess movies. Using my father and my limited knowledge, I deduced that men were not so great when it came to asking for directions. My world revolved around the paranoia that Mr. Prince Charming would get lost on his way and end up in some obscure island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and that I would end up dying alone. When I was 11, I read a scientific study and discovered about the chemical oxytocin, which caused people to fall in love just by staring into each other's eyes to create this simulated affection. My soulmate theories that day were thrown out the window and shattered to 1,000 little pieces. That day I discovered two things. One, love was controlled by our brains, not our heart or soul, and that mushy crap that they sold to us was absolutely false. And two, if a chemical can decide how much you really love someone, then you can pretty much fall in love with anyone, regardless if they're healthy for you or not. When I was 13, I fell prey to an oxytocin overload, which drew me to a boy my age. And it's strange, really, what the chemicals in the hypothalamus can do to you. And it's even stranger once you know that the euphoria that you get from this crush and the rejection and the depression that you get from rejection are also revolved around the chemicals in your brain, as opposed to your heart aching or your soul shattering or something poetic like that. And now at age 16, I stand up here talking to you about love. And you're probably right, I'm probably the least qualified person to do this, but the topic of today's speech, it will be love and biology from its very unimpressed standpoint. And now there are three major drives when it comes to love. There's the sex drive, partner preference, and attachment, which are respectively regulated by the testosterone, estrogen, vasopressin, and oxytocin. So, discussing the first category of the sex drive, the first category, which is sex drive, in your brain you have a section known as the hypothalamus, which is primarily responsible for regulating automatic systems such as thirst or hunger. However, it appears in regards to love, it sends nerves to the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions and feelings, playing a part in love or lust. So in order to really be able to discern what the hypothalamus had to do with the sex drive, scientists took a group of mice and cut out the hypothalamus in each of these mice's brains. And originally, the original hypothesis was that despite lacking a hypothalamus, these mice would still have primitive emotions and be able to reproduce. But what we've discovered is that cutting off pieces of the hypothalamus completely destroys sexual behavior. And it turns out that the hormones that act as a primary motivator during sex are secreted by the hypothalamus. Additionally, it turns out that scientists in the field have actually conducted research around the sex drive, or the primitive hormone overload. And they've discovered something really, really significant. Arthur Aaron, Lucy Brown, and Helen E. Fisher took 17 people who were deeply in love and discovered via a functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, that dopaminergic reward and motivational pathways contributed to aspects of passionate love. Likewise, they took 15 people who had just been rejected and discovered that the area in the brain responsible for gambling, controlled anger, and obsessive compulsion disorder all responded, which means that the human brain is wired to delude you into believing in love for the sake of reproduction, thus the evolution of the sex drive. Now, most biologists in the field believe that we evolved the sex drive to expand our range of partners to search for the one that is most advantageous to us and can help us bear the healthiest offspring that are most likely to survive. And before we look at the hormonal occurrences here in our very complex Homo sapien brains, we should look at some other species. Several animals, particularly the males, will put on large shows of extravagance in order to attract mates. Take the peacock, for example. The more eloquent the tail feathers, the better. Likewise, when we assess the preference of the females, there's a significant attraction to those with the more fancy plumage. See, the thing is that mate selection is dependent on the survival of the fittest. The brain is wired to attract those that would produce offspring with a higher chance of survival. And this can really be related back to us Homo sapiens, because think about it. The most popular trend, six-packs, signs that they're really fit and can probably outrun, say, a saber-toothed tiger or a zombie apocalypse. Obsession with bigger breasts for females shows signs of fertility. While statistically the majority prefer these traits, there will be a variation in preferences due to the different locations and adaptations necessary in order to survive, right? However, most females, when looking at long-term investment, and a mate will seek parental investment, resource provision, and the ability to pass on good genes, which might be dependent on phenotypes. In the long term, men tend to look for women that are committed, willing to marry, and are visually appealing to their tastes. Finally, the last pillar of biology is attachment, which describes the human's ability to stay with one another, a biological behavior. The attachment theory also explains why the abused tend to stay with each other. You can break the attachment theory down into four main criteria, which are identifiable through the toddler ages, which is secure, anxious, ambivalent, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachment. Secure attachment is found in toddlers that know if their caretakers will return, do not panic when said caretaker leaves them. Anxious and ambivalent are children that show significant distress once their caretaker leaves them, and an anxious avoidant child shows absolutely no real connection with their caretaker and could care less if their caretaker left or stayed. Disorganized children are children that tend to have no set mindset when it comes to reacting to when their caretaker leaves. So the attachment theory experiment really rolled out like this. A lot of babies with their mothers were placed in one room. Then the experimenter had the mothers leave and recorded the reaction of each child. Placing them in one of the four attachment theory categories. And they later tracked these children as they grew up, and they've discovered that children with a secure mindset show trends in having higher self-esteem, higher self-independence. They're better able to form relations and have lower instances of anxiety and depression, while children of anxious avoidant will treat a stranger the same way that they treat their loved ones, which is commonly associated with abusive relationships as they mature. Disoriented children tend to be clinically depressed in the future. So what does this exactly have to do with love? Well, it ties back into partner preferences and really when relationships are healthy. So a toddler with a secure mindset will probably grow up to be more self-independent, indicating that they'll know when is the right time to, say, leave a relationship before it gets significantly worse, while a child with an anxious avoidant attachment may tend to stay in abusive relationships, not exactly being able to identify what love is or what really simulates love for them, because they treat a stranger and the same way as they would treat their caretaker. In conclusion, we've talked about the three main pillars of love in biology, which are sex drive, partner preference, and attachment. And whether you are a strong believer of love or tend to look at it from a chemical standpoint, there is no way around the fact that love tends to be a strong force that motivates many people in society, whether they be a poet or a biologist. Thank you.